If she qualifies for
Are you
Medicaid,
forgetting what you
she'd
said 2 minutes
automatically
ago?
be informed.
Are you forgetting already what you said?
In today's heavily politicized and hostile environment, reading the news can become frustrating and intimidating. Although we have more access to information than ever before, we are now also increasingly aware that the information that we see is not likely to be fully correct. Every news source carries its own bias in serving its own agenda, and even the most reputable organizations have been shown to publish either inaccuracies or complete falsehoods. As ordinary people having no specific education or expertise in politics, what can we do to be as informed as possible? We compile a streamlined guide on how to read the news critically. Our method doesn't require you to trust anyone in particular. You will instead be relying on critical thinking and being attentive to detail. Note that our process applies mainly to political news, and other topics have their own particularities and might require a process of their own.
Now, reading from page 2 of volume 2 of your
For this
report,
guide, we have chosen a common political article to discuss a widely covered event. Robert Mueller sticks to the script in high-profile hearings by Jeremy Herb from CNN on July 24, 2019. We will assume that the reader knows little to nothing about the context of the events prior to reading this article. Step 1. Identify the arguments of the article. After reading the article normally, the first step would be to determine the main argument or general idea conveyed by the reporter. Avoid overthinking it, and you should be easily able to sum it up in a single sentence. Be careful not to confuse the argument with its underlying premises. You will also notice that the main argument is often included in either the title and/or the first few paragraphs of the story. The article might contain other secondary arguments that either reinforce the main idea or describe a progression of events that will follow as a result. Argument. The hearing did not change the status quo, and both the Democrats and Republicans have other strategies planned to fight over the continuation of the investigation and proposed impeachment. The first premise: Mueller avoided both the Republicans and Democrats' questions. The second premise: Robert Mueller repeated damaging information from his report about President Trump, but it was not enough to change anyone's mind or for Democrats to pursue an impeachment inquiry. Step 2. Analyze the premises. The next step would be to evaluate if the argument is a logical conclusion derived from the premises. The argument we're dealing with in this case is inductive in nature. Its premises do not prove its validity on its own. Rather, the acceptance of the argument depends on the strength of the premises. With the first premise, the author provided a link to another CNN article that goes into more detail about this premise. Specifically, it claims that Mueller declined to answer questions at least 206 times and referred lawmakers to his report at least 43 times. Although its premise seems to be factual and accurate, and 206 questions seems like a large number, we have been omitted the full picture. We can, however, quickly calculate that 206 questions in 7 hours leads to an average of 2 minutes per question, which is not an unreasonable number. We can also assume that if Mueller did provide an exceptional answer to a question, it would have been mentioned elsewhere in the article. The overall strength of this premise is thus strong. The second premise comes in two parts that cannot be separated without changing its meaning. The first part implies that Mueller repeated damaging information about Trump, and that was supported with a few quotes from the testimony. Problematic is an understatement and should be illegal activity. Isn't it fair to say that the president's written answers were not only inadequate and incomplete, his answers showed that he wasn't being truthful? Asked Representative Val Demings. I would say generally, Mueller responded. As we say in the report, and as I said at the opening, we did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime, Mueller said. What we can see is that quote 1 is definitely a negative towards the president. Quotes 2 and 3 are much more nuanced. While neither of the quotes is positive, neither has been shown and explained to be damaging to the president. So the overall strength of this premise is very weak. Now let's look at the argument. The argument relies indirectly on the premises, but could stand on its own. Democrats and Republicans will move on to pursue other political strategies since the testimony did not provide an advantage to anyone. Step 3. Identify the evidence. We base our analysis on the web version of this article. On this particular page, CNN provided us the following pieces of evidence/supporting material. Around 2.5 minutes of video extract from the testimony, links to related articles from CNN, and several quotes from the testimony itself. As can clearly be seen from the above list, the evidence provided is very weak. The short video only shows Mueller answering 2 questions. The video represents less than 1% of the testimony and could have been handpicked by the author to skew the conclusion. The linked articles have the same issue as does our current article. They lack strong evidence of their own and many of them don't even have a video. The quotes used for this article could have been taken out of context and be incomplete in their nature. Overall, we'd have to put our trust blindly in CNN and the author in order to accept either the premises or their argument. Step 4. Evaluate the organization and author. It is important to always give the benefit of the doubt and assume innocence until proven otherwise. Over time, by analyzing a growing number of articles, you'll learn to trust or distrust a given source. When we take a first look at CNN's political coverage, we must examine similar headlines and look for patterns to determine their values, writing ethics, inherent bias, and their relation to other organizations. Doing some preliminary searches on Google is quite revealing. First, it is remarkable that Google itself highly trusts CNN and often ranks the source high in their searches. Both American politics and international coverage by CNN is visible on the first page of the majority of searches. However, searching about CNN itself and its bias, numerous sources are criticizing the network for left-wing bias. One study, for example, alleges that CNN's coverage for the first 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency was 93% negative. Most other news outlets also published mostly negative reporting about the president, but CNN, as well as NBC, had the largest percentage. A quick look into today's coverage about Trump seems to be confirming their bias with 10 negative, 2 neutral, and 0 positive headlines. Although our analysis seems to be indicating that our source is biased, it is important to realize that a quick online search and a glance over the headlines is not enough to statistically prove such allegations. It is by performing those checks over a long period of time that one can truly start noticing patterns and learn to distrust a source. Beware of fact checkers and media bias watchdogs. Although they provide a useful tool for analysis, they can themselves be biased and twist the numbers using unethical or incompetent methodologies. Overall, we wouldn't trust CNN to write an unbiased piece about the president or the Mueller investigation. Everything that is reported should be double-checked and compared with other sources. Step 5. Determine the likely values and motives of the author/organization. Based on what we research on the publishing organization so far, we can speculate the values on which our article on Mueller's testimony is based on. Although attributing motive can be a fallacy in and of itself, it is important to understand where the author is coming from. We could assume the motives from at least the following 2 perspectives and deduct a logical conclusion from them. Many other perspectives can be considered and have their own merit. Assumption number 1. CNN and the author are neutral and objective in their reporting. Their reporting would therefore accurately represent the entire truth. Mueller's testimony was indeed inconclusive. Mueller's statements confirm damaging information about the president. It is logical that the Democrats who oppose Trump's actions but are unable to use the testimony as political leverage will continue to look for strategies to impeach or at least resist the president. It is also logical that the Republicans who are in favor of the president will continue discrediting the testimony and ignore any damaging information. Assumption number 2. CNN and or the author are biased in favor of the left wing and are inaccurate in their reporting. Their reporting would therefore distort the reality on the testimony and its conclusion. They could omit or misrepresent facts in order to either increase the credibility of Mueller's testimony or worsen his damaging statements about the president. The argument and premises presented by the article might be mostly correct, but exaggerated to weigh in on one side or the other. What is the likely opposing version? This is a difficult exercise which requires playing the devil's advocate and to imagine what the other side would be advocating for. Assuming that CNN does have a left-wing bias against the president, what would a right-wing organization claim instead? They would likely discredit the entire testimony of Mueller, claiming that it only repeated what was already published publicly months ago. They would also frame Mueller's statements as partisan attacks against the president, therefore questioning their validity. Finally, they would pay the Democrats in a very weak position to act on impeachment or any other political move. Step 6. Compare to other headlines and the general trend. The final step of the process would consist of comparing the same or very similar headlines from other sources. We would expect organizations with similar political leanings to paint a similar narrative. Note, some news organizations publish multiple articles regarding Mueller's testimony on the same day. Choosing a different article from the same publisher could alter the conclusion of the comparison. Also, some publishers have revised the text and the title of the article over time. This might have an impact on the perceived bias. From Vox, Mueller says on camera that Trump wasn't exonerated from obstruction of justice. The focus here? Trump is not exonerated, therefore he is not innocent. Now let's look at the language, which is weighted against the Republicans. Knocked down President Donald Trump's main talking points. The exchange between Nadler and Mueller was still monumental. His Republican allies continue to falsely claim that he didn't obstruct justice. The format here is mostly quotes from Representative Nadler, who's a Democrat. From CNN, Robert Mueller sticks to the script in high-profile hearings. The focus here is that Mueller didn't reveal new information, he declined to answer any questions beyond the report, but the status quo remains the same for both sides. The language with this is mostly neutral towards all sides. The president's conduct was problematic. Mueller grew most animated when Republicans tried to criticize the team that worked under him. Republicans lobbed a variety of attacks at Mueller. The format here is mostly long-form explanation and analysis with some quotes. From Reuters, Mueller says he did not exonerate Trump, defends inquiry's integrity. The focus here is that Mueller didn't exonerate the president. The testimony didn't add momentum to Democrats. Trump declares victory and claims that the Democrats have no case. The language is mostly neutral towards all sides. When it comes to the format, quotes and explanation on the main points, Mueller's testimony and non-exoneration, and as well as Trump's victory speeches. From Fox News, tight-lipped Mueller faces GOP ire over probes handling his hearing retreats Russia report. The focus here is that the Republicans are heavily criticizing Mueller for the double standards of his investigation. They accuse him of bias against the president, arguing that there is no exoneration required since Trump is innocent until proven otherwise. The language in this one is weighted against Mueller and the testimony. Mueller appeared flustered, often asking lawmakers to repeat questions. Ohio Representative Steve Chabot called the report a one-sided attack on the president. End quote, the last 3 hours have been an epic embarrassment for the Democrats, end quote. The format here is also mostly long-form explanation with analysis and some quotes. And now from the Daily Wire. GOP lawmaker presses Mueller into admitting he held Trump to a different standard. The focus here is that Mueller held Trump to a different standard, being biased against the president. The language here is also weighted against Mueller and the testimony. You can't, Ratcliffe said. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. Slam Mueller for stepping outside his purview. The format here is mostly quotes from Republican Representative Ratcliffe. The article's argument is fully in line with the representative's argument during the hearing, therefore the quotes are self-explanatory. The most obvious trend that was consistent among all sources is that the Republicans and the president are stating opposed to the Mueller report. The Democrats on the other side stand in solidarity with the special counsel since they benefit politically from damaging statements about the president. Fox, CNN, and Reuters focus on the main results of the testimony, that Trump is not exonerated, which implies that either he is not innocent or that he has something to hide. Whilst Fox News and the Daily Wire focus on the Republicans' questioning regarding the legitimacy of the entire investigation, which implies that the president is innocent until proven guilty and that he was treated unfairly. In the end, we should expect that every news source has at least some bias embedded in their day-to-day reporting. The process of identifying and interpreting said bias is lengthy, difficult, and impractical to perform it on a regular basis. You should still strive to follow the steps from time to time in order to become familiar with the best and worst sources. It also helps to be better informed in general, and it is important to note that each of these steps is a subject that is much more profound and deserving of its own guide. Asking questions is the bedrock of critical thinking and a necessity of a healthy discussion within a democracy. Although achieving the absolute truth is impossible, making an effort in order to become a more productive part of that conversation is of utmost importance.